Staying attuned, a poetic gaze, backwards and forward, with folks both brilliant and humble.
Towering figure, craft-led life with a big dream, smile greeting us we. Our guest today is Daniel Dayton. He is a new father and recovering farmer turned software engineer. Like all our guests, he has many other things too, and we will dive into that now. Humility is not. After much grandiosity came a moment of clarity, thinking for a second that I had been humbled, which quickly spiraled into the cavernous realm of shame, and instead of thinking I was God's gift, I thought I was less than a discarded piece of flavorless and chewed through bubble gum, sticking to the curb near the gutter. Shame it came. This cycle, well, it cycled. Now, with the cycle paused, I can see that I was misunderstanding humility. Being humbled is not the same thing as having humility. See, mania and depression, both grandiosity and shame, share only one characteristic: self-obsession. Having humility is not thinking less of myself. It is thinking less often about myself and thinking more often about you.
That's good. I like that. Heavy. But good. Yeah. When did you write that?
I can check.
Curious.
I mean, maybe the last 2 months.
Yeah. That's really nice, man.
Thanks.
I think it's like, yeah, it's got a lot of insight into humbled versus being humble. Yeah.
Yeah, it was on the 20th of June.
Okay, nice.
Which was a pretty wild month. Not wild in a sort of like full context of my wild, but an elevated mood, which resulted in hospitalization for 5 days in early July. But, you know, what's interesting is I'm writing nonstop when I have more energy than normal. Like I can't like drive without thinking of a poem and having to pull over, or dictating it directly in a text message.
Yeah.
Which then has all these errors of dictation.
Sure.
That I can screenshot and post later as like when I get somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But that sort of obsession, like somewhere in that obsession, I wrote about something I was learning about humility. And so what's weird about that is that I was never like, in those moments, I wasn't necessarily wrong.
Right.
It was just amplified in a way that made it hard to be loving, to be caring. And I think I was writing about that because the cycle of grandiosity and shame are the only two poles I ever knew. And that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, man. Yeah, shame's a tough one for sure.
What do you think the difference between shame and guilt is?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they're usually pretty tied together. I feel like you can have shame without having like maybe done something super wrong. You can have shame more in like just how you are. Whereas guilt, I feel like, is usually driven by something you've done. That's how I usually look at it. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like once you start, for me, when I've felt a lot of those feelings, it's like very like spirally. Like I just keep getting worse because I'll do something and then I'll, you know, feel really bad about it. So then I drink to like, and then I continue that path. So I mean, there's like, yeah, 20s, like we're talking about. Dark, man. Dark time. For me. Not for everyone, obviously.
Yeah. But I like the distinction that shame can be without guilt. and that guilt is usually the result of action. I mean, some cause. It's an effect to some cause that you caused.
Absolutely. Yeah.
My uncle had described it to me because I, maybe around this time, was asking him that question.
Sure.
And he essentially said, guilt is I feel bad about something I did. Mm-hmm. Shame, I feel bad about who I am.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think your point that it doesn't take guilt to be, like, it's not just a segue into shame that you just need to prevent from going to shame sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think about in mine when I'm talking about depression, the shame doesn't even make sense.
Right.
There's no point source.
Right.
I didn't necessarily do anything wrong. I just fucking hate myself.
Right. Yeah, and that's like, I mean, I hate that you feel that way, first off. But, because you're a great guy, 100%. But I feel like I have some other really close friends that struggle with that, and it's like really hard for me to like relate often, just because I it's not a feeling that I have very often, which I'm very lucky to not have. So, but yeah, like one of my best friends is like one of the most talented people I know, smart as can be, but yeah, just has a lot of like anxiety and shame tied up in like who he is, and I it's really hard for me to kind of like relate at times, to, like, not to him as a person, but like to how he's feeling in these moments that are like like you're talking these cycles,
Because what you're saying is it's especially hard when you see this person as all these great things and some bad things, but never the net always being very positive,
right.
And they have that inverse relationship with themselves.
Sure.
And that's hard for you.
Yeah, it's not. It's like
it's hard for me too.
Yeah, it's like it's just hard. It's not like I just hate seeing them struggle with that. When it's like, I just wish I could like, whatever that is, take it out, comfort it, But it's like it's such a deep seated feeling. It seems like so. It's like, yeah, man.
Yeah. So I have, I mean, the really interesting things on mania and depression to talk about for sure. Always from me because I'm just actively talk therapy, staying sober, and taking meds.
Yeah.
And the meds for bipolar are life-saving things that are really hard to dial in.
Yeah.
And I believe the way we look back on lobotomies now, we'll 70 years look back on this and be like, they're really just throwing darts at a board, trying to try this, try that.
Yeah.
But, I think in the 90s, there was a lot of sort of this resurgence. Well, obviously, I mean, like genetics, neuroscience, all these realms that brought a lot more sense to what was happening and then could direct and guide medication usage. But I don't want to get too deep into that. I guess I wanted to stick with that theme of like the depressed person, because I'm going to remove myself as that and think of myself more as you to others who they're depressed and you see them differently than the shame they see themselves.
Yeah.
And what do you think, have you discovered any sort of solution when a loved one is feeling like that you can provide something? Or does it just feel futile?
I don't know. It's like, so my brother committed suicide. He was like really depressed. So it's like, I feel like it's definitely, I've struggled to like think if it's not futile. Because I tried my best with him, But he just like really didn't want to be around. And it was like really hard. So like with my other, like all the stuff, I try and talk to like people that are in my life that feel those ways. Like, I feel like there are little tricks that I use that are like from such a different spot. But I think, therapy is like the most important in my opinion. So I was in therapy a long time growing up. And that helped me quite a bit. So, that's as much as I can encourage, that's what it is. Because it's really hard for me to, relate to like these feelings. And like, especially when my brother was out like that, it's like, he just really like struggled to feel like a part of anything, which was like just so hard to see. And like, and no matter what I did, it was like, just like, tough. But so I think like just being supportive is the most you can do, and just try and like make them feel seen and make them like feel appreciated. That's pretty much all I can offer, and that's what I try and do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a brother and sister, and they both suffer from unipolar depression. And I remember times when we went over to my brother's house when he had dropped out of college. I was still in high school. He was renting this apartment and working in this factory in our small town. And we would really just be so fucking nervous, like turning that key.
Yeah.
Like what we were about to see.
Yeah.
And it would just be completely blocked out all, you know, I mean, it was just sort of like takeout boxes and just like, I mean, it's a mess, right? And it's what someone would say is quintessential, or just sort of the
totally.
what you'd expect. But I remember having a discussion with my sister, and it's a really conflicting thing, but ultimately I had this discussion with her, and because I could relate, you know, I mean, I know that sort of feeling. Like when I lived in San Francisco, I wouldn't go across the bridge to Marin. Like I certainly wouldn't walk across it, but I didn't even want to drive across it.
Yeah.
And that was for fear that that's where I would jump. For a 6-month period when I lived in San Francisco. So like I get it, and I actually told her what I wanted someone to say to me, and it might sound ridiculous, but I said to her, like, if there's no other way, like, I understand.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if that's offensive to anyone.
No, I don't think it is. I mean,
but that's what I told her, and it wasn't some form of reverse psychology.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's not what I wanted to happen, but fuck, she's living such a terrible existence. Yeah. Like, maybe I do want that to happen. If it's as relieving to her, and there's never going to be, if for example, as she feels, it'll never fix itself or never get fixed,
right,
and she'll get relief, then only by death, I suppose. So
right. That's
like tricky. But anyway, I appreciate you sharing about your brother.
Yeah. Sure.
I obviously didn't know that.
No worries. I mean, yeah, it's like it's like you're saying, you know, it's like it was super hard. But he was just the suffering he was going through. It's like, I do think that's what he really wanted, and so I try and respect his opinion, or, you know, his decision. That's kind of how I feel about it. But yeah, it's like, it's heavy, man. Feeling like that, I just like, I can't even imagine. And so it's like, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do as a person, and I just try and make sure that people that are around me feel as loved as, you know, as I can make them feel. That's all you can do, I think.
I'll say one thing first. My good friend Amanda's father committed suicide maybe 5 years ago. She found him with his head missing in his room.
Jesus.
And super traumatic shit. She has since taken over his business and grown the business massively and done great things. Anyway, at his funeral, the pastor, preacher, whatever, said, you know, defined it as, which was nice to hear a Christian not sort of say anything more than what he said, which is essentially, you know, this defines your biggest mistake that we all wish you never would have done. And that's, again, that seems to make sense for me, not as, when I put myself in the shoes of someone who's depressed, it isn't the biggest mistake, probably, unless some miracle happened and they got undepressed, then it was maybe. But fuck, like for everyone else, it feels like a mistake because they wish they were still around and a fighting chance that they could get better. But like, I just, as much as I've recovered, I still see a certain futility, and that fucking hurts, you know, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But as it relates to humility in the poem, what do you think about that word? Because I talked about, you know, having humility is not being humbled. Mm-hmm. And then someone's even brought it to my attention, the idea of humiliation and how that relates to humility or not wanting humility. I never personally saw those words as related in any way. I saw humbled and humility but humiliation was never there in my mind. But
sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so like, for me, like understanding of like what humility is more just like seeing other people for wherever they're coming from. You know, it's like more like about like respecting people's opinions. I think like, you know, obviously it's your brain, you're probably thinking you're right most of the time. But it's like more about being open, you know? That's like how I look at it. And especially like, I think there's like, it's like it gets complicated because, you know, obviously you want, if it's a crucial situation and you really need someone to like get to the thing that, I mean, I do think there's, you know, truth, and as much as some people and our politicians want to say there's what are the alternative facts or whatever, I think there's like, you know, there's like at some point you have to kind of like all arrive to the same place. But it's really just about how you kind of like, I think humility is about how like you can lead the journey for like communicating with people. A lot of it, that's how I look at it. You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, like, you obviously don't want to just think you're the best all the time and always right, because you never are, you know? So that's kind of how I look at it. And then like, yeah, humble. I mean, that's how they're tied together in my mind, you know? Like, if you have humility, you're being humble, like, most of the time. So in my mind, they're usually really tied together.
So the way I was writing about them, right, was I'm seeing my current humility, efforts towards humility, which are very substantial and new in my program of recovery,
yeah,
specifically, but like as that being very different from what I thought being humbled was.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, and to that point, like, you know, like,
I guess
like
it's the verb versus the noun.
Right. Well, and also in AA, I mean, you know, it's all about like faking it until you make it, sort of, you know, so it's like, yeah, you don't really feel it that way, but you're kind of like faking these things, and then the idea, right, is that you kind of like start actually having the feelings too. So it's like, I feel like that's, you know, it's like a good way to arrive there, and that's why I think, that's why they tell, I mean, in my experience, that's why they kind of like tell you that in those programs, because you're like, yeah, you don't actually feel sorry, we know that, but just go say sorry, and then start thinking about, see how that makes people feel, and then you can like kind of start building these other feelings that you were kind of like drowning or whatever, you know.
Well, this leads me to another poem that I'll read when we need to, but it'll be if we need to. But it's specifically about God as placebo.
Sure. Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, like, right. I mean, that's the whole thing about in AA too, right? Because that was the hardest thing for me. And when I'm not sober, in case anyone's wondering, but I've been scared. My dad's been sober 34 years, so like, alcoholism was always something that was very like part of like my life. Like it's all over my family, so I've like always been very like cautious about it, and I mean maybe not as cautious as I should be, but like I've been in the room some and like had these conversations, and the God thing for me was more just like, it is more humility, right? Where you're just like, I don't know everything, and that's okay, and then you're like just kind of like, yeah, like the powerlessness for me is just understanding that, you know, like you don't understand everything, and that you know, can take advice from people. And I think that's a hard place to be in when you're like feeling as shitty as you can be to be in that room in the first place. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Do you think those steps would be good for everyone to follow, not just addicts?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, at least like awareness, right? To like think through those problems, because they relate to so many other things. It's just like, that's the easiest one to like, or the one that was kind of formed around. But yeah, I mean, then, you know, it's like, it's interesting too, because it doesn't work for everyone, you know? And I have some other friends that have tried other programs where it's more of like moderation, and that works for them. But, you know, it's like, it's just a complicated thing.
Yeah, I think humility, so I talked about being humbled into a cavernous realm of shame. And like, I think that shame, like really, there's a word called guilt somewhere in that phrase, where like I was humbled because I was guilty, and then I took that into a terrible spiral, as you mentioned, about shame, right? Which just was ruminations like, why the fuck did I do that? I'm such an idiot. I'm stupid.
Right.
I don't think of others. I'm a fucking piece of shit. I'm egocentric, whatever, right?
Right.
And then that's who you are to yourself.
Right.
And that's potentially precipitating a downward spiral into a place of depression for those that are you know, predestined for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I think like I want to read you this one real quick. It's a short one. But it's very related to the AA humility you were just talking about. It's called eventual relapse. You see the placebo effect working for those that think God is real. They seem to live lighter. So you shovel sugar pills with no relief. Because a placebo won't work if you know it is a sugar pill you are swallowing after all. So you sit and sulk. You try going to church and praying harder, and again, with no relief. So you turn to it. With no time to sip, you gulp, knowing that this bottle of bourbon is no fucking placebo.
Yep. I can definitely see where that one came from. Yeah, I mean, it's like interesting, right? Because like I feel like that's like the easiest way to look at religion, and that's how I looked at. And I'm not religious really, but I'd say I'm like a little spiritual. And like go back to your point, a question about like favorite books. Like one of my favorite one is Franny and Zoe by Salinger. You ever read that?
No.
It's pretty good. I mean, it's like definitely short and like I don't say it's like the densest book ever, but it's kind of all about like this family, and they're kind of all about these different religious readings that they were kind of fed as children. And then there's this one book about how you can pray without ceasing. It's kind of like and it kind of is like the whole
crave without
praying without like always be praying. So like you like sync it up with your breath or something. But it's really interesting because there's really more about just like how all religions are kind of one. And it's like, so it's, you know, that for me was like really like influential, just kind of seeing it that way, where it's like, yeah, I mean, like the most simple interpretation, if you want, is go to church, believe that, you know, you have a white God that created the earth in 7 days or whatever, 6 days, took 1 day off. But like, yeah, I mean but there's just layers to all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like something, to feel maybe humble about. I don't know. Like there's something bigger in you, which I do think like, it's like I came from, I was in a biology major undergrad, and so it's like it's interesting because I still feel like the infinite. If you go infinite down too, it's also more like we don't know what the fuck's going on. You know, it's like it's just as confusing and just as crazy how interrelated everything is. So it's like that's kind of how it's like there's something we don't understand about how like you know our interactions and cosmic forces that are moving outside of us. That's how I looked at it.
How do you reconcile as a biologist, reconcile is maybe the wrong word, but how do you approach the intelligent design argument, and like which parts make sense to you?
I mean, I definitely just believe in evolution. I mean, I think it's like, you can see like, it's like if you have a hypothesis that like God made things and you look for pieces like, oh, the banana fits in our hand perfectly. Intelligent design, you know, like there's like that's what I've heard before. Yeah. Or I think like those things, like, you know, if you have an end result at the end, or a hypothesis with a conclusion already drawn, it's easy to find like, you know, things to support that. Yeah. So I think that's what I look at it. I mean, I think like
they're cherry picking evidence that supports
right, and any science is like that, you know. It's all like that, and I think it's more about like. The fact that we're still discovering stuff is more like, to me, is like a proof that we don't really know what's going on. You know, it's like like our understanding is very, you know, it's getting better, but you know, it's never gonna probably be able to understand everything. It's pretty complicated, it seems like.
Yeah, I think the word Lamarckian, I think Lamarck, if I'm remembering correctly from class, it was this, he had the idea that, this is before Darwin, but this idea that giraffes were horses that had extended necks because they were stretching. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. If you stretched enough, sure, you'd become a giraffe. Right. Yeah. I mean, there's and like, just to think about, I mean, I think what I heard from you as well is that like looking back on things like that, you're like, of course that doesn't make sense. Right. It made sense then, and you look further back, and you know, with Mendel. Yeah. But like, then you're here, and just as I talked about psychiatry, looking back on this, you know, 200 years from now, they're gonna be like, they're pretty primitive in their understanding of how this works. Right. I mean, it's like you just see us do it to ourselves over and over again. You know. What is the new one? The what is the stuff in the water? The plastics, microplastics. Yeah. PBAs. Is that it? PFAs. Yeah.
But it's like, of course, right? It's like DDT. It's like we just can't learn the lessons. Like, oh, this application, look how great you can cook all your stuff in plastic and it never sticks. Nothing can be wrong with this, you know?
Right.
Well, it turns out, not the best.
Right.
But it's like, that's just humans.
But it is, I have to, I guess, say for a second that, like, I think one can be critical of the way that science can't explain many things. And looking back, that's proof that, the world is not flat, or, looking at these previously held beliefs. And then there's people, especially in this sort of like Facebook era of death of expertise, right wing generally,
sure.
but not always, who would argue that is evidence that the scientific method doesn't work.
Right.
And that, to me, is exactly the evidence that scientific method does work, because we're getting closer and closer to approximating the truth.
Right.
And if you can't see, probably, and it's not linear, it's probably exponential,
right.
like truth, like finding,
right.
then you're pretty undereducated.
Right. And I mean, they keep saying, like, what they're saying now, like, you can't get any smaller on the, like, micro chips or whatever. So that we're like, kind of hitting this threshold of, like, computation power and stuff. And I mean, who knows? I mean, they could be right. It's like, I just feel like there's always this doomsday scenario where you're like, and I mean, I'm definitely, it's easy to be when you're in the generation to feel that way. Like, obviously, the environmental stuff is getting worse and worse and worse. But I feel like what's crazy is that, like, you see environmentalists when they create these doomsday scenarios where it's like, I mean, when I was in college, it was like, if oil hits $100 a barrel, the economy collapses.
Peak oil, right?
Yeah. It's like, it's over. And then it happens and nothing changed. And you're like, it's really easy for people to dismiss, like, all the obvious things that are being, like, destroyed. So it's like, it's a really tricky thing to, like, convince people, make people feel like needs to happen quickly, but then also not alienate people when you're not right 100%, which of course you're never going to be. And that's, like, what's so crazy. It's like, that's why people want to argue, like, all people want to argue about is, like, how you're wrong. Right. And that's like so dumb,
Yeah. Ineffective and just a waste of our short time on this earth.
Yeah.
I want to read you this real quick.
Right.
It rhymes with earth. Expertise dearth. I am not an expert on anything. Of course, this relates to humility and science and expertise. I possess an above average IQ. I have a bachelor's of science degree in geography from a mid-tier college, specialty in GIS and cartography. I spent a great amount of my adolescence through my 20s and 30s actively destroying my brain cells with a variety of substances, and my professional career has had many reinvented iterations, reaching heights of mediocrity at best. I am not an expert on anything. And that acknowledgement directly suggests a humility that is key to knowing more. This humility enables me to be curious in what data, information, knowledge others offer. And this infusion of new facts and ideas makes me more confident, knowing that we all share a great ignorance about much of this world. But because we decide to lessen the ignorance by learning more from people with different wealth pockets of data, information, knowledge, we grow by filling, however slightly, our voids. This relative growth is easily measured, namely in one's comfort within this awful world. I don't agree with folks who say there is an inverse relationship between knowledge and happiness. I find the more knowledgeable I become, the more respect I have for the infinite complexity of life, and thus I gain more humility to continue to seek experiences nourishing and experiences rich in growth opportunities. And it is these experiences that lessen my overall angst and agitation with the way the world continues to fail most of us.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I feel like part of what you're saying that stuck out to me in particular is, like, that, like, well, I would invest in myself a lot. Like, yeah, because a lot of that's the same for me, right? Mid-tier college, maybe not even mid-tier, and then, like, kind of, like, bounce around a bunch career-wise. But I've always tried hard. But it's like, did I never try hard enough to, like, be the, like, expert because I was scared to? And I feel like that, yes, is the answer. And then, like, so that's one thing I've been trying to, like, kind of overcome later in life. It's like, okay, I want to go for it now. Like, let's go all in. Let's try really hard.
Right.
Because even, like, it's easy, and I feel like booze or partying for me was that thing where it's like, I can still do this and get a B and party my ass off. So I'm killing it, But it's like, really, I was probably scared to like go all in and get a B plus when I really tried. And so I'm using this as like more of a crutch. And that's like one of the things I've thought about for a long time. And I don't know what's right or if that's true. Yeah. But recently I've been trying to be like, hey, let's try and take these like, support mechanisms around like, just put yourself out there a little more.
Yeah. Well, I think I totally agree with that. I also took LSD before soccer games.
Yeah.
And I was, recognized at a certain district level as a good forward.
Yeah.
Still.
Sure.
And I could have been like much better.
Sure.
But I was afraid, exactly like you.
Yeah.
I mean, because now I can say, well, I got the district.
Right.
And I was on LSD.
Right.
So.
Right.
And I was smoking weed before every game.
Right.
So that.
I feel like a lot of people are like that.
Yeah.
A lot of people that are like really like talented in a lot of ways, but like also kind of reject like success by these like metrics that our society put in place. It's like an easy way to like be alternative in that way. And a lot of my friends are like, most of my friends are that way, I'd say. And it's just interesting to see, because then it's like you have the opposite side of the spectrum as something like an Ayn Rand sort of personality, where it's like no humility. Like, I am a God's gift to whatever. Everyone should be, like, I'm a titan of industry. Everything should be straight through to me. And it's like, those are like, people that I guess like come like Zuckerberg or whatever. It's like, it's just interesting to see, because I don't know. It's just something to think about. I don't really have an answer to it.
I guess for me is I was thinking about that less, which is while writing this. And then it's great that you brought it to my attention, because like I'm talking about, like I'm showing this a little bit of a, I don't know, extra humility in writing that, right?
Sure.
Like, do I actually believe I have no expertise?
I think it's a more honest look, right? It's like a more honest look at like what, like, it's like, because you're not saying that you're not like great in a lot of ways, but you're not like an expert in anything. And I guess like it just made me think where it's like, if you'd really wanted to be, I'm sure you could have been, right? So then it's like that's all I was thinking, I guess.
Well, I guess for me is it's like, what if I paired those two things together, which is now I acknowledge this and I talk about these wealth of information, the wealth packets, and that line up with my voids, and so then I can take that, sort of round out some of my weaknesses and strengthen some of my, sharpen some of my strengths.
Right.
And I wonder what it means to seek mastery or excellence as opposed to expertise, because it almost seems like mastery is saying, or excellence is like, I'm in action, never finish doing this.
Right.
Where expertise is kind of like, I'm the expert, suck my dick.
Right. No, yeah, totally.
I'm gonna cut that.
No, but yeah, no, it's totally true. And I feel like, like the continuing curiosity and continuing to strive to be better. That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, most definitely. And like, I think that like, I also talked about learning from others, but also learning that others are just as dumb as me.
Right.
And then you start realizing that's why, like, humility is not just I'm dumb and everyone else is great.
Right.
It's like we're all fucking dumb.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then the person who...
That's just being an adult, right?
But that's how I'm feeling about humility, is like, I'm only going to be around other humble people because they acknowledge that we're both kind of dumb and we're both kind of smart.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
totally.
But anyone who's going to sit or stand up and grandstand this notion that they have all the answers, I have no time for you, because I'm practicing humility, which means I don't let you pollute my airwaves either.
Sure.
And so I think that's something that's misunderstood about humility. It seems to be this sort of common idea of laying down and always just turning the other cheek or letting others have the final word. And I'm like, no, I think it just really also means choosing other humble people. And then you're in a symbiotic thing of growing truth.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing about whatever 40 minutes in, like, we have more truth than we did 40 minutes ago.
Sure.
I mean, for whatever this is worth to whomever's watching, or mostly just to us and Shay. Like, we have some greater truth. And like every sort of interaction I have, I want to progress that notion, and that is mastery, right? It's not really expertise.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. And I feel like it's interesting too, because like, I feel like I'm just so out of the habit of like trying to have conversations like this. Like, it's something, I did when I was like younger, like, when I was in college. But now I feel like it's like, adult, you're on your friends. A lot of those people you already had these conversations with, or like you feel like you have an understanding of where they're like coming from. And so I'm not talking about things like this very often anymore. Personally, I mean, it sounds like you're doing it, which is great. But like I'm like more like, you know.
Well, I don't have a 14-month
and then that's
child.
about it. Yeah, I mean, but that, to your point, I feel like that's given me like a whole new kind of like, not lease on life, but like more like a new perspective where you're like you're being seen a lot more. You know, like this person's like they're definitely seeing everything you're doing.
Yeah.
And copying your behavior.
Yeah.
So it's like this whole other like, what's good about what you're doing? It's just weird. It's a weird thing.
Yeah. But what you just said, I guess, I mean, could be looked at from certain people as a criticism of this, or a self-criticism of what you're doing today.
Yeah, no.
Because you did say that this was actually the adult thing, but then you talked about not doing this as your kind of reserved.
Yeah, I think it's more like, for me, I feel like it's like, I think this is great, personally. But I think it's more of like like almost like a whiplash sort of thing where I just got, you know, it's like this sort of, like these sort of conversations, as like powerful as can be, they can also kind of like edge into that whole thing of like, you know, like if you're not thinking about these things, you're not doing if you're just being basic and watching your Netflix and going home and not really thinking about like bigger problems, that's lesser than or something, you know? And I feel like that I would kind of like swung a bit for a long time where I was just kind of like over it. I mean, just not over it, but just more like, you know what, I wasn't in a place to hear it, I guess. Like I wasn't changing my perspective on anything. I wasn't really like talking about my feelings as much. And it's changed. I feel like it's changed for me, but I'm just pointing out that at certain times in my life, you know, like it was much more of like what I would talk about all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things. One being like clearly we have seasons and sort of like trajectories of what we do that are kind of marked tree rings in our sort of past and in our future growth, our experience through the world. I'm already characterizing it as growth, and maybe it should be more neutral. But like, I guess to me, like, I very much respect people who can watch Netflix for 3 hours, go to bed. I try. I have to take extra meds.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that
because I'm often sort of like not at peace because some of these questions that don't have answers and seemingly thinking on them and talking about them only opens new questions.
Right.
Can be tough.
Right.
But what I'm learning in my experience is really like, for example, I've got this so I was reading Dopamine Nation and relating, of course, my substance abuse problems with all these other sort of other types of addictions, right? And they're not, my other addictions might be overeating and might be, or certainly are, social media. And I think about why, you know, and I realize that I'm just like trying to say so many things and ultimately feel like I'm screaming into nowhere with very little interaction with what I'm posting on social media. I have 6 different Instagram accounts. One is all about my dog. One is all about selfies of me.
Yeah.
One is about hedonism, which used to be very much drugs and alcohol and food. Now it's just a more genuine pursuit of pleasure. One about poetry, one about this podcast. Anyway, the point is that like it's a problem.
Yeah.
And so I got this app called Brick.
Oh yeah, I heard of this.
Yeah, so it's a physical RFID chip inside of a 3D printed plastic thing, pretty simple.
Yeah.
You set which apps you wanted to disable, you tap it, you go away, and right now, it's been 3 hours since I've been bricked from social media.
Nice.
And then you have to physically touch it.
You feeling okay about it?
I'm feeling great.
Yeah, hell yeah.
But that's largely because I'm having something so much more impactful than this broad, sort of wide net of shoot this into the atmosphere and see what happens. What's funny that I've learned about this, I mean, I can go a while, and sometimes I indulge a little more, you know, tap it, but then I'll go tap it back.
Yeah.
Because when I'm in the same room, I can easily turn it on and off, right?
Yeah.
But when I'm out, I'm out. And I could hide it in my wife's car, I could do whatever. But the point is that in Dopamine Nation, she talks about all these sort of like ways in which we physically, I forget what they're called. It's not a physical coping strategy, but it's this, which is essentially like something you have to do. It's that much harder to go do the thing, right?
Right.
So like making cigarettes illegal for people until they're 21 or 18 or whatever, right? That is the government doing that, or not buying booze on Sunday, whatever the shit, right?
Right.
But more how we orient our lives around these things. And I guess what I'm getting at to all of this is that, like, the brick, to answer your question, I feel really good. I felt better last week, and all I had changed was I just started using the brick.
Hell yeah.
But like what's interesting is that I go with this little dopamine hit to go tap it. Well, it's been 5 hours. And then I see nothing happen, and I tap it again, and I go another 5 hours. And I'm like, I'm just learning nothing ever really happens.
Yeah, totally.
And even if it did, it would be so noisy. Like, would I even enjoy it?
Yeah.
So Danny and I will go to Lake Johnson or go to Durham, and I brick. And I'm not posting, like on my hedonism blog, I would be like at a Michelin star restaurant in Paris taking photos while eating of every course that came out and posting immediately and typing shit on it.
Right.
And she's like, why do you have to do that? It's like, because it's Instagram.
Right. Yeah.
It was like, I need them. Part of this art project is this exhibitionism that doesn't even have a delay.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, it's wild too, because it's like we also make memories, you know what I mean? That's like the craziest thing to me, like with some of social media, it's like, in the pictures, I struggle to take pictures now too, because it's like, I do it some, but I'm like, that's like, I won't remember it the same if I take a picture. I got into that a while back, but even though I like love film and I love movies, all this stuff, I don't know what my point is, but it's like definitely like, it's like an interesting like dilemma of like, you know, because there's like that whole like kind of idea that if you take a picture of a time, your memories totally form around that picture, right? Like your memory is always gonna be altered once you look at that picture, because that's gonna be how you think of it. So then it's like, you know, and like then same deal with writing. You write it, and then that's how you remember it. So it's just interesting. Like, and then like my wife's been reading. I don't know if she's reading the same book as you, but we're talking a lot about social media stuff because of like the child and like iPhones and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like I remember reading a book in high school, Amusing Ourselves to Death. Neil Postman, you ever heard of that book? It's all about, it was just like about TV and like how TV was like changing, so people's like, you just constantly want to be distracted, you know? Constantly. And I mean, I'm the same way. I can't like, I've been trying to figure out ways to like settle, and I've been swimming a bunch, but you can't listen to anything. Yeah. That's been nice, just like spend time with your like head, you know, your brain.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like the idea, first, you know, related to that idea that you remember it differently if you photograph it. And it's this idea of like, do you want to document life or do you want to live life?
Right.
And then,
but then you do forget things. So then it's like it's a good question.
Right.
I don't know.
But have you seen the Black Mirror episode, The Grain?
Yeah. It's a great one.
That's a great one. If y'all haven't seen it, Black Mirror Grain, it's probably season 3. It's fucking great. But the idea that I had when I was a kid, when we started getting these, I don't know, we had maybe digital camcorders at some point when we were using snowboarding when we were in high school or something, right? And I started realizing that, like, yeah, you can film a lot of shit, but then it takes the same amount of time to watch that shit. So if I took 30 years of video, 0 to 30, I'd be 0 to 30 to 60 to watch all of that, which would take up that time from 30 to 60 that I wouldn't do anything but watch 0 to 30. Fuck.
Gotta get an editor.
That's a plug to Shay Stifelman collab, folks.
What's that Linklater movie where he like filmed it over like that whole people? Yeah. So cool.
But the cigarettes are another thing that I took 50 days off.
Respect.
And that was hard, much harder than all the other substances.
Yeah.
But I went back to it, and it's just so interesting the way I was kind of encouraged to take it back up by the program. Because they're like, don't change anything within the first year, you know? If you're a sex addict, if you're this, just just don't drink.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, nah, I'm going to quit cigarettes. And they're like, and I'm like, wait, are you saying I should start cigarettes yet? I mean, I've been quit for 50 days.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm way past the physiological like thing.
Right.
Definitely the psychological thing. But the reason I wanted to quit and the reason I will quit again, and I'm not buying cartons, I'm buying one pack at a time, is largely because this could be the last pack.
Like it.
And I don't want to waste $80 or whatever on that carton. But the idea being that, like, I started realizing that if I start cutting out social media, if I start cutting out, you know, sweets, if I start cutting out certainly alcohol, cocaine, psilocybin, like, why am I still doing this? Because my justification that I've seen for cutting out alcohol, for example, is like I have way better times. Like at first it was a little weird socializing with with non-alcoholics out in the world, but then it pretty quickly gave me this, wow, I'm not fucking with my mood all the time, and people think I'm present when I'm not. I don't remember a certain thing, or I say something stupid, right, all that shit. But like, then at the heart of it was this idea that I had to put something in me to deal with how shitty the world was, which could be headphones listening to music, which could, I mean, if anything, right? But cigarettes, the reason I want to get rid of them is they're objectively terrible for you.
Yes.
Nicotine is not really bad for you, but the combustion of the tobacco is. The tar, all that, right? It's carcinogenic. But the idea was like, I'm going out every 45 minutes, or I guess even more frequently here, and it's pulling me outside in rainy conditions and hot conditions, and why am I going outside interrupting whatever I'm doing? That could be the middle of a Michelin star meal. And I would just be like, well, you know, the chef would probably want me to go out and have a cigarette. I'll be back for dessert or next course. But like, the reality is, it's not inherently pleasurable. It's the fucking withdrawal that's so unpleasurable that I go smoke the next one just to make sure I'm not irritable. Like, I'm not actually, I'm experiencing a relative difference, but it's only from negative to zero.
Right.
It's not like, oh, I went from 0 to 10. Because like the withdrawal symptom of each cigarette means that every 45 or so minutes, I have a withdrawal. I go satiated, and usually by halfway through, I don't even want the rest of the cigarette.
Right. Well, those also take forever to smoke, so it's part of it.
But anyway, addiction.
Yeah, man, it's rough.
How do you use social media?
I don't. I mean, I'm just an observer. I don't post anything. I still have like the farm Instagram. I'll like look at stuff. Mainly when I'm using the bathroom.
It's the best time.
Yeah.
That's when I'm like bricked, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm shitting.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is like the best time. But then I'm forced to do something else.
Yeah.
Which is think of the next poem about the toilet paper being too thin.
Yeah, we just took our TV down this week, so I'm pretty pumped on that. We had it like in our living room.
Yeah.
Last night, took it down. So, excited.
And that's guided by Sarah's reading, or just your guys' feeling on screen time?
I just feel like I've been like, just kind of like, you know, not sedating myself, but it's just, instead of thinking of something to do or reading a book, I just been, you know, turning on some bullshit. Yeah. And it's not like we're watching anything good, you know? No. A lot of SVU recently. But I mean, it's pretty good. It's not like great. Yeah. But yeah, just like it's like talking more about like what I want our child to see, like her to be more involved. I mean, I read a lot growing up. My parents, I still want them to see like movies, or her to see movies and stuff.
But that's a treat, or right. an experience.
Make it more of like not the main thing, the main distraction. So I think it's more about that. So it's just like, just trying to. Engage more with my making stuff again and that sort of stuff. Like, it seems like the same trip you're on. It's exciting.
Yeah, the interesting part for me is that, well, first of all, the TV, to comment about that, I think the only challenge with taking it down for me is that it is a sort of like shared experience between my wife and I.
Yeah, totally.
And most of the time, I fall asleep.
I mean, we still have a TV. It's just not in the living room. You know?
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's great. But that's also this sort of proximity, sort of like putting it in a place that's more a ritualistic. We will do TV in this room. I think that makes perfect sense. We've pushed around the idea of a TV in our bedroom since we moved in. Never did it. at our old house, we could lift it up and take it into the bedroom, and we do that when
Yeah.
it was really, and that was cool because it really is like it's a little bit of work.
Yeah.
It's got to be a fucking Sunday where we really want to dig in.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of reasons why I don't want the TV in there, and I've never had a TV in my bedroom, and that's largely because I watched my grandma become so isolated, very socially vivacious, interesting person, become so isolated towards, well, most of what I knew of her life.
Yeah.
Where she lived alone, divorced, and lived alone, and she had a TV and a TV in the bedroom and a TV in the other bedroom. And it was just kind of like, it was almost like Requiem for a Dream aspect, but she wasn't all on pills.
Yeah.
She would take stats on a yellow legal notepad with one of those little pencils that, you twist in the...
the automatic.
Not mechanical, I guess, but automatic, And they're like tan or whatever. And she would write stats about Friends or, How I Met Your Mother, whatever the fuck she was watching. And she would talk about these characters as if they were, she knew them.
Yeah.
And it became really trippy to watch somebody who had so many social skills and so much going, like in her previous life, in her life before she was a grandmother when I knew her.
Right.
And to just see isolation and complacency and just sort of sedation or at least activity, right, was to engage in taking stats on Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And like which actor was in this show and then guest starred in another season. And anyway, that's like maybe interesting to somebody, but like I saw that and was like, because she would go to bed with the TV on and it would play all night, and then she'd wake up and it was on.
Yeah.
So it was never off.
Right.
And that, was the before social media is like kind of like
Same
always
thing.
on button.
Right.
But what do you think about older technologies, right? Because now we're talking about ChatGPT, we're talking about social media, and also the gutting of all local news.
Sure.
And like media being reshaped over the past 15 years immensely. But like, what do you think about, like, do you know much about, like, I don't know, I'm just asking because I don't, but like previous technology? Because I think people forget that, like, I saw this picture in like the 40s, people on a subway car all reading a newspaper.
My dad
just like they're buried in the phone.
My dad was editor for Lawyers Weekly. Like, because it used to be I think it's still around, but they were
Lawyers
Weekly.
Okay.
It was like a weekly publication about everything in North Carolina about lawyers and law. And I used to go every Wednesday. They would, like, paper came out Thursday, so I'd go and like put it all together. Yeah. So I mean, I saw a bunch of that, and it's like it's a lot of work. And this was like, and then they started finally getting like the digital stuff. Before they were laying it all out, pasting on. So yeah, I mean, it's all like a convenience thing. It's like kind of wild, like like how fast, like how much time do we really need to save, And like that's like kind of like, I've been thinking about that some too with the getting rid of TV. It's like you're like everything is swung so far towards convenience, where it's like now like all we really have to do is watch TV. It's like you can just go and like. Get your microwavable Hot Pocket for dinner, and then, okay, well, I'm done with everything. I don't have nothing to clean up. Yeah. So that's what's interesting. It's like we've created this culture of convenience where now it's like we have to figure out ways to fill our time because just the normal things that take to live are kind of taken care of. So that's what's kind of wild about it.
I once had an open mic in Denver that I ran, and I remember my opening remarks one time was just, and this was a theme of kind of continued open remarks, but it was basically, thank you all very much for coming out. Why? Well, you had a choice.
Yeah.
And an increasingly convenient and attractive choice, which is to stay home, which is to order food in, or Hot Pocket from the freezer.
Yeah.
It's to put your PJs on, get ready for bed 5 hours early.
Right.
It's to, watch a movie or TV, right? It's to, RGB, pixel love, masturbate.
Yeah.
Like you didn't need to go out to get anything you needed tonight. It was all there.
Right.
And yet you chose, somewhat subversively, to fight that urge. So thank you for coming.
Well, it's well said. No, it's totally true.